I shivered as I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white against the cold leather. The snowstorm outside raged on, blanketing everything in a suffocating white. I'd been driving for hours, trying to make it back to Portland before the roads became impassable. But now, lost and running low on gas, I was beginning to lose hope. The headlights barely penetrated the swirling snow, and I squinted, desperate for any sign of civilization. That's when I saw it, a faint glow in the distance. Relief washed over me as I steered towards the light, praying it was a gas station or a motel. As I drew closer, my heart sank. It wasn't salvation I'd found, but a weathered wooden sign half buried in snow, "Welcome to Jerusalem's lot." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. I'd heard stories about this place, whispered tales of a town abandoned decades ago after a series of mysterious disappearances. I knew I should turn back, find another way. But with the fuel gauge hovering dangerously close to empty, I didn't have a choice. I pressed on, the old Ford creeping down the deserted main street. The buildings loomed on either side, their windows dark and accusing. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. As I passed an old church, its steeple silhouetted against the gray sky, a flicker of movement caught my eye. I slammed on the brakes, heart pounding. There, in the churchyard, a figure stood motionless among the snow-covered graves. It was too far away to make out clearly, but something about its stillness made my skin crawl. I blinked, and it was gone. "Get a grip," I muttered to myself, easing off the brake. "It's just your imagination playing tricks." But as I continued down the street, more shapes seemed to materialize in my peripheral vision. Shadowy forms darting between buildings, faces peering out from darkened windows. Each time I turned to look, there was nothing there. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the howling wind and the crunch of snow beneath my tires. I was about to give up and turn around when I spotted it, a gas station at the edge of town. The pumps were ancient, but it was my only hope. I pulled up and killed the engine, steeling myself to brave the cold. As I reached for the door handle, a knock on the window nearly made me jump out of my skin. An old man stood there, his face weathered and grim. "You shouldn't be here, stranger," he said as I cracked the window. "This ain't no place for the living, not after dark." "I just need some gas," I replied, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "Then I'll be on my way." The old man shook his head. "Ain't no gas left in those pumps. Not for years. You best come with me to the bar down the road. We can wait out the storm there." Every instinct screamed at me to decline, to turn around and take my chances with the blizzard. But the thought of being stranded here, alone in the dark, was even more terrifying. Reluctantly, I nodded and stepped out of the car. "Name's Tookie," the old man said as we trudged through the snow. "And you best stay close. There's things in this town that hunger for fresh blood." I wanted to laugh it off as the ramblings of a superstitious old-timer, but the weight of unseen eyes upon us was undeniable. Shadows seemed to writhe at the edges of my vision, and more than once I could have sworn I heard the sound of something large moving just out of sight. The bar was a rundown wooden structure, its faded sign proclaiming it Tookie's Bar. Inside, a fire crackled in an old potbelly stove, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Another man sat at the bar, his eyes haunted as he nursed a glass of whiskey. "This here's Booth," Tookie said, gesturing to the man. "He's been stuck here near as long as I have." I nodded a greeting, but Booth barely seemed to register my presence. His gaze was fixed on the window, watching the swirling snow outside. "So," I said, desperate to break the oppressive silence, "what's the deal with this place? Why is it abandoned?" Tookie exchanged a look with Booth before answering. "It wasn't always like this. Used to be a thriving little town. But then folks started disappearing. At first, it was just one or two. Then whole families. Those who were left fled, leaving everything behind. But you stayed," I said, looking between the two men. Booth spoke for the first time, his voice barely above a whisper. "We couldn't leave. Not after what we saw." A chill ran down my spine. "What did you see?" Before either could answer, a piercing shriek cut through the night. It was like nothing I'd ever heard before, part human, part animal, and filled with an unholy hunger. I leapt to my feet, heart pounding. "What the hell was that?" I demanded. Tookie's face had gone pale. "They're getting bolder. Usually don't come this close to town." "What are you talking about? What's out there?" Another scream, closer this time. Something slammed against the side of the building, making the whole structure shake. Booth whimpered, curling in on himself. "We need to get out of here," I said, moving towards the door. But Tookie grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong for such an old man. "Are you mad? Going out there's certain death. Our only hope is to wait for dawn." As if in response to his words, the power flickered and died, plunging us into darkness. The only light came from the dying embers in the stove and the sickly glow of the moon through the windows. Shapes moved in that pale light, pressing against the glass. Faces both human and inhuman, mouths gaping wide to reveal rows of needle-sharp teeth. Hands, if you could call them that, scratched at the window panes, leaving deep grooves in the glass. "Oh God," I whispered, backing away. "What are they?" "The hungry ones," Booth murmured, rocking back and forth. "The ones who couldn't move on. The ones who need to feed." A window shattered, and something began to squeeze through a writhing mass of shadow and teeth. Tookie cursed, grabbing a shotgun from behind the bar. He fired, the blast momentarily illuminating the creature. I caught a glimpse of pale, corpse-like flesh and eyes that glowed with an unholy hunger before it retreated, shrieking. "That won't hold them for long," Tookie shouted over the howling wind. "We need to make a run for it." "Run where?" I asked, panic rising in my throat. "The church. Holy ground. It's our only chance." We burst out into the snow, the cold biting at my exposed skin. All around us, shapes moved in the darkness. Screams and inhuman howls filled the air as we ran, slipping and sliding on the icy ground. I could hear them behind us, gaining ground with every step. Something grabbed at my jacket, and I stumbled, nearly falling. Booth wasn't so lucky. His scream cut off abruptly as he disappeared into the seething mass of shadows. Tookie and I reached the church, slamming the heavy wooden doors behind us. We leaned against them, gasping for breath as things clawed and scratched on the other side. "Will this hold them?" I panted. Tookie shook his head grimly. "Not for long. But it might buy us enough time to reach the bell tower. If we can make it to dawn." His words were cut off by a tremendous crash. The doors buckled inward, wood splintering. Through the widening gaps, I could see them, the hungry ones. Men, women, and children, their flesh pale and rotting, eyes glowing with an insatiable hunger. As we backed away, I realized with horror that I recognized some of the faces pressing against the door. They were the same ones I'd seen in the old photographs lining the walls of Tookie's bar. The missing townsfolk returned at last to Jerusalem's lot. "Run!" Tookie shouted, shoving me towards the stairs. "Get to the tower." I took the stairs 2 at a time, heart pounding in my ears. Behind me, I heard Tookie cry out, followed by the wet sound of tearing flesh. I didn't look back, couldn't bear to see what had become of my only ally in this nightmare. The bell tower creaked and swayed in the howling wind as I burst through the trapdoor. Below, I could hear them coming, their inhuman shrieks growing louder with each passing second. I slammed the trapdoor shut and pressed my back against it, praying it would hold. As the creatures below clawed at the wood, I looked out over the town of Jerusalem's lot. In the pale moonlight, I could see them now, hundreds of shapes moving through the streets, all converging on the church. The hungry ones, drawn by the promise of fresh prey. I closed my eyes, trying to will myself awake from this nightmare. But I knew, with a sickening certainty, that this was all too real. As the trapdoor began to splinter beneath me, I realized that my only hope now was to somehow survive until dawn. But in Jerusalem's lot, dawn seemed an eternity away, and the night was far from over. The wood beneath me groaned, and I scrambled away from the trapdoor just as it burst open. Pale, grasping hands reached through, followed by faces contorted with inhuman hunger. I retreated to the far side of the bell tower, my back pressed against the icy stone wall. As the creatures pulled themselves up, I frantically searched for a weapon, anything to defend myself. My hand closed around a rusted iron bar, likely used to ring the massive bell looming above. I brandished it before me, my arms shaking. "Stay back!" I shouted, though I knew it was futile. These things weren't human anymore, driven by an insatiable need that reason couldn't touch. The first of them lunged at me, and I swung wildly. The bar connected with a sickening crunch, and the creature stumbled back. But there were more behind it, an endless tide of writhing, hungry shadows. I fought with a desperation I'd never known, my world narrowing to the space of the bell tower and the relentless assault. Blood, mine and theirs, splattered across the stone floor. Time lost all meaning as I swung and dodged, my muscles screaming in protest. Just when I thought I couldn't go on, a sound cut through the chaos, the deep, resonant toll of the church bell. The creatures recoiled, shrieking in pain. I hadn't hit the bell, had I? I looked up to see the massive iron bell swinging on its own, each peal sending shockwaves through the tower. The hungry ones retreated, clawing at their ears, leaving me alone in the sudden silence. Heart pounding, I approached the bell cautiously. As I drew closer, I could make out faint writing etched into its surface, symbols I didn't recognize, pulsing with an eerie blue light. A voice spoke, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You've shown great courage, traveler. But your trial is far from over." I spun around, searching for the source, but the tower was empty save for me and the mysteriously ringing bell. "Who are you?" I called out. "What's happening?" The voice chuckled, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "I am the Watcher, guardian of this cursed place. For too long, Jerusalem's lot has festered, a wound in the fabric of reality. You may be the key to cleansing it, if you're willing to pay the price." Before I could respond, the world around me began to shift and warp. The stone walls of the bell tower melted away like wax, revealing a vast, starless void. I floated in nothingness, paralyzed by terror and awe. Shapes moved in the darkness, vast, unknowable things that hurt my mind to look upon. I squeezed my eyes shut, but their presence burned behind my eyelids. Behold the truth of Jerusalem's lot, the watcher's voice intoned. A nexus of dark energies, a beacon for things that should not be. The veil between worlds grows thin here, allowing the hungry ones to slip through. Images flashed through my mind, the town's history unfolding in a dizzying montage. I saw the first settlers arrive, unaware of the ancient evil slumbering beneath the earth. I witnessed the gradual corruption of the land and its people, culminating in a night of unspeakable horror that left the town abandoned. But why me? I gasped, overwhelmed by the weight of this cosmic revelation. Why am I here? You were drawn here, as all are, by the town's dark influence. But unlike the others, you have the potential to break the cycle, to face the source of the corruption and end it once and for all. The void around me shimmered, and I found myself back in the bell tower. But it was different now, older, more decrepit. Through the glassless windows, I could see that Jerusalem's lot had changed as well. The buildings were little more than ruins, overgrown with twisted, unnatural vegetation. The sky above was a sickly green, pulsing with otherworldly energies. This is the true face of Jerusalem's lot, the watcher explained. A cancer spreading across reality. If left unchecked, it will consume everything. I shook my head, overwhelmed. But what can I do? I'm just me. I'm not a hero or a mystic. I was just trying to get home. Sometimes, the most unlikely vessels are the most effective, the voice replied. You have a choice to make. Leave now, and you may escape with your life and sanity intact. But the horrors of this place will follow you, haunting your dreams until the day you die. Or you can stay and face the heart of the corruption. End this curse once and for all. I wanted to run, to wake up from this nightmare and forget it had ever happened. But I knew, deep down, that I couldn't. The images of what I'd seen, the weight of this terrible knowledge, would never leave me. What do I have to do? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The bell began to toll once more, each resonant peal filling me with a strange energy. The symbols etched into its surface glowed brighter, and I felt knowledge pouring into my mind, ancient words of power, rituals to bind and banish. Follow the sound of the bell, the watcher instructed. It will lead you to the heart of the corruption. But be warned, the hungry ones will try to stop you. They fear what you've become. As if on cue, inhuman shrieks erupted from below. The creatures were returning, drawn by the bell's tolling. But this time, I wasn't afraid. I gripped the iron bar tightly, feeling it hum with newfound power. I descended the tower steps, my body moving with a surety I'd never felt before. The hungry ones swarmed towards me, but I spoke words in a language I didn't understand, and they recoiled as if burned. Outside, the twisted landscape of Jerusalem's lot awaited. The bell's toll echoed in my mind, guiding me through the ruined streets. With each step, I felt the corruption trying to seep into me, to turn me into one of them. But the energy flowing through me kept it at bay. I don't know how long I walked, fighting off waves of creatures and navigating the ever-shifting town. Time seemed to lose all meaning in this place. But eventually, I found myself standing before a gaping chasm in the earth, the source of the town's corruption. Tendrils of darkness writhed within, reaching out hungrily. The stench of decay and wrongness was overwhelming. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I knew what I had to do. I raised the iron bar, now glowing with eldritch symbols, and began to recite the words the Watcher had placed in my mind. The air around me crackled with energy as reality itself seemed to bend and warp. The hungry ones converged, howling in rage and fear. They clawed at me, trying to stop the ritual, but an invisible force held them at bay. I felt my life force draining away with each word, the price of this cosmic reordering. As I spoke the final syllable, a blinding light erupted from the chasm. I felt myself being torn apart, my very essence scattered to the winds. In that moment of dissolution, I saw glimpses of other realities, worlds untouched by the corruption, parallel Jerusalems where history had taken a different course. And then, darkness. I awoke with a start, my heart pounding. I was in my car, pulled over on the side of a snow-covered road. The storm had passed, and weak sunlight filtered through the trees. For a moment, I was disoriented, unsure of what was real and what had been a dream. But as I looked around, I saw a weathered wooden sign half buried in snow, "Welcome to Jerusalem's lot." My blood ran cold as memories came flooding back, the horrors I'd faced, the choice I'd made, the sacrifice required to cleanse this place. I started the engine with shaking hands, desperate to put as much distance between myself and this town as possible. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of something in my rearview mirror, a figure standing by the sign, watching me leave. It raised a hand in farewell, and I could have sworn I heard the faint toll of a bell. I pressed down on the accelerator, my mind reeling. Had it all been real? Had I truly faced cosmic horrors and emerged victorious? Or was I losing my grip on sanity, unable to distinguish between nightmare and reality? As the miles stretched between me and Jerusalem's lot, I tried to convince myself it had all been a vivid dream brought on by stress and exhaustion. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had glimpsed things not meant for mortal eyes, and that knowledge would stay with me forever. The corruption of Jerusalem's lot had been cleansed, but at what cost? As I drove on towards an uncertain future, I couldn't shake the feeling that my journey was far from over. The Watcher's words echoed in my mind, "The most unlikely vessels are the most effective." What other horrors awaited me on the dark roads ahead? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain, I would never look at the world the same way again. The veil had been lifted, and there was no going back to blissful ignorance. As I merged onto the highway, leaving the forests of Maine behind, I made a silent vow. Whatever came next, whatever nightmares still lurked in the shadows, I would face them.